Pretty much. There are just the people like um like those Marvel fans who were watching Captain Marvel, and I happened to be sitting next to them on the day it came out. Ugh. They were just is that they were just the type of people who would enjoy any old slop as long as it had the Marvel brand on it.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh dear. I mean, actually, serious question. How do companies do this? I mean, how do you make, how do you, I don't know, how do you manufacture a a a like following of consumers or of viewers who will just accept whatever you throw at them? Like, I mean, how do you do that even? I'm not even like if you had told me maybe 5, 10 years ago that you could get people who would be like this, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have gone, no, 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 no. Everyone has critical uh, facilities. It will be fine. But faculty, sorry. But and now I'm just looking at people going, what is wrong? Why is that guy crying? Because crying while watching a Star Wars trailer. Oh,
Well, I hate to get real deep, but the answer is real deep, which is that we sort of define ourselves. We have, how do I say it? We have no deeper spiritual sense of our identity, and I don't mean that in any religious sense. We don't know who we are. We have no, especially in America, we have no shared heritage. We have no connection to any heritage, and what that what that means is that we kind of define ourselves by what we consume. Go back to that consume meme that we were talking about earlier.
oh yes, the buy product, consume product, and get excited for next products.
Yes, exactly. And not only that, identify ourselves with those products. So much of what people do now is a sort of sense of they get a sort of sense of who they are from what they consume. And if you if you already were a comic book enthusiast and you were so excited that Iron Man 2 came out, and then you were triply excited that Captain of America came out, and then you were quadruply excited that the Avengers movie is going to tie all these movies together. Now you're a diehard at this point. And even if you didn't start off liking comics, if you liked Iron Man and Captain America and Thor separately, then you watched the Avengers and you liked them all together. At that point, you're a Marvel person. You're kind of identify yourself as a Marvel person. You're gonna watch every single Marvel film, even if it's as bad as Black Panther or Captain Marvel. And each of these films grosses over 1 billion.
Yes, it's the thing is though is how do you get this sense of loss? I mean, I think I might be guilty of this to some extent, but how do you get this sense of loss? I mean, is it just hyper individualism which has caused this?
Sense of loss? What do you mean?
Well, because if you're latching onto a brand, you clearly don't have an identity within a collective which
Ah,
you
okay.
can embrace, or you can say something like, I mean, years ago, for instance, like many years ago, when you know travel between different regions was more difficult, people would identify themselves as being, from a certain city or from being a certain region. I mean, in England, for instance, Yorkshiremen, like, they're English, but Yorkshiremen are often very proud of saying, I'm a Yorkshireman, I'm from Yorkshire. And and they're very proud of doing that. And years ago, most people in England were like that. They'd just be like, "Well, I'm I'm a I'm from Cornwall, for instance, and stuff like that." But that seems to have been slowly disappearing. So, is this
I'll
just the
tell,
result
I'll
of?
tell you. I got an answer to this question because what the go back to what you said about the Yorkshiremen. They're proud to be that, right? Well, and I'll use America as an example first, and then do an example with Britain, which is in America we're only about 250 years old as a republic, so it's already a little harder for us to have a sort of shared heritage. But at the same time, we're so big that we have a north and a south divide. That kind of divides us and where our pride is. And then we've been bombarded for the last 80 to 100 years with a certain thought that America is a nation of immigrants, meaning America is not its own national identity. The result of that is that we don't have a national identity we can be proud of, and this is the narrative. We don't have a national identity we can be proud of, even if we did have a national identity. Even if you say American is an ethnic group, something you can identify. Even if you did say that, you would be made feel bad for saying that because the American nation was built on the backs of slaves, and it was built on the backs of colonialism, and we killed Mexicans in the Mexican-American War. We killed Native Americans, genocide. So even if you had a sense of American identity, the narrative is coming through that you wouldn't want to be proud of it. So what do you do? Well, let me get to Britain first. Britain does have a lot more history than America, and it's not hard to imagine that British aristocrats in World War One. You don't have to imagine it. There's records, but British aristocrats in World War One had pride in who they were as Brits, and they would do their duty as British aristocrats. Well, what the British have been experiencing is something similar in America, where if you have a heritage, they want the narrative to be that your heritage is bad and you should abandon it. So, what are you going to replace it with? And what America especially has done, because we're the most capitalist, consumerist people, nation, country on the planet, is we've made what we consume our identity.
This does sound like the yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, with Britain, I think it's more complex than with America. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the old sort of narrative of America was that it was the creation of pioneers, settlers, and brave soldiers. I mean, and this of course has been. Am I right in thinking that was like the main narrative before it was like, well, it's all slavery?
Yeah, it was kind of we were a proud people who wanted to be free, and we didn't want taxation without representation. That's kind of the first narrative of that.
Yeah, because that's because if you frame the American myth or the American Foundation myth or story in there as I am a descendant of proud pioneers, people who fought savage Indians or people who built great monuments and cities and were striving for freedom. I mean, that sounds pretty epic. And going back to Britain, if the Briton feels that he's the descendant of people who built an empire, like the greatest empire seen in the modern world, um, a place of culture, literature, art, and all this stuff, then suddenly you have an amazing heritage. And in Britain, I can't speak for America, but in Britain, what's happened is first slavery is like the British are bashed about slavery all the time. It doesn't really matter that William Wilberforce did anything about it. It doesn't really matter that the Royal Navy put a stop to it for the most part. It doesn't matter that the Royal Navy helped, you know, build a colony for ex-slaves. It doesn't matter that the British Empire, while it had its cruelties, it was actually a fairly nice empire in some ways, and for the most part, it broke apart peacefully. I mean, it really doesn't matter. It's oh, the Britons, they invented slavery. You know, the English were just sat around a table one day and said, "Oh, why don't we enslave Africans?" As if they were the first people to think about it. And then it's just like, and then it's all about, oh well, the British, they built an empire and stuff. And I'm not actually too sure where the I mean, consumerism, you say, is rampant in America. Um, but over here it's somewhat more mellow. I'm not exactly sure how to diagnose exactly what's happening here.
Well, look what they're doing or what they're trying to do with James Bond. James Bond was, a relatively modern British cultural hero, and when you think of him, I can't think of a James Bond that looks anything other than a standard British athlete in a nice suit, in a really good suit, you know. But now, just in the last few years, they're talking about, well, can James Bond be a woman? Can James Bond be a black person? And so, look, that does not look like your standard British athlete, you know. But my point is that even if you had a cultural icon as recent as 50, 60 years, even that is trying to be subverted.
Yeah, with James Bond, they've actually, I think, one of the producers, his surname's Broccoli. The Broccoli family has been producing James Bond films for years.
Yes,
Had stated that James Bond can only be a man, which must be a real pain in the backside for all the progressive newspapers who were, talking about what you were just saying. But to be honest, I mean, what, another 10 years? They'll probably backtrack on that. So,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I haven't got my hopes up. I mean, they're getting as close as they can anyway. She's just the woman, whatever her name is, she's another double O agent, and they put her next to him because that's as close as they're going to go at the moment.
yeah. So if I understand correctly, they made her 007 as James Bond replacement.
That's something I read in a yeah, that's something I read in the headline that she's going to replace him as 007, but not as James Bond. But they're synonymous.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, you're playing with things here. I mean, I've seen people make the argument, oh, she's not James Bond, she's 007. That's fine. It's like, this is pedantry. If I
Exactly. And that's how they're trying to get away with it.
I mean, they're moving their way as close as they can, essentially, without officially doing it. So, and another 10 years, who, what's to say? What's to say? But I
I don't
mean,
have high hopes.
yeah. Thing is that since this deconstruction, for lack of a better term, of the national narratives of many Western countries. I mean, um, I'm sure the same, for instance, is happening in Spain. Although, ironically, when the Mexicanos asked the Spaniards to apologize for the invasion of the Aztec Empire, the Spaniards said no, that they would not apologize.
Good.
Yeah, I was shocked. I was like, "Oh wow, what spine?" But the same thing. I've been told the same type of stuff. Deconstruction is happening in Spain. It's happening in like all the Western nations. So, I mean, would this explain really just why big capitalist conglomerates are so progressive at the end of the day? Because they know that supporting people who, you know, the people they support and the causes they support are typically anti-capitalist, quite funnily enough, but they seem willing to support them. I mean, is it just because they understand that this deconstruction of the national narratives creates the perfect consumer?
Well, the short answer is yeah, and I'll reference a book called Capitalist Realism. I won't get too deep into it, but the relevant part is that if you want to be the most socialist, communist, anti-capitalist person, you can you can't avoid capitalism at this point in our Western country. You can't avoid it. But if you feel like you are combating it, then and you feel like you're wholeheartedly against it, then you'll have no problem buying a pro-feminist T-shirt, which is ironically a capitalist function. So you can, as long as you the what these people do, who the SJWs are on their side. Yeah, they're anti-capitalist in theory, but in practice, they're just as capitalist as everyone else, and that capitalism is also kind of defining who they are. It's really hard. They're trying really hard to do it, and they're having more success in America because we're a younger nation. We're having more success in America than they are in Britain. I won't get too much into current events, but I think I just read that the Brexit vote won again, and it's definitely happening. Britain is leaving the EU, or the UK rather, is leaving the EU, and every nation in the European Union, as it is, still has its own cultural heroes that it looks to. The more, and if they want to destroy those nationalities, they're going to have to destroy those cultural heroes the way they are trying to do by making 007 a woman.
Yes, this gets into like broader politics, but let's go ahead. The thing about the European Union is it's had a real struggle in recent years because unlike America, like Europe is separated along historical lines, ethnic lines, linguistic lines, and is trying to tie all those things together has been really difficult. But your point about the destruction of national heroes makes a lot of sense because if you do get rid of the symbols of a nation, or you try to, for lack of a better term, globalize the symbols of a nation, you do reduce the identity, which means that there'll be more for a federation of Europe. I think Juncker, who's the president of the European Commission, said as such that he wanted a United States of Europe. And the thing they keep stressing is this idea of the European identity. And the problem is that there's really no such identity. There's not. It's like it's such a broad umbrella term. It's like, well, the French are completely different to the Scottish, for instance, or the English. The Spaniards have a history which is much different to that of Sweden. And
Yeah, the notion is ridiculous, and I almost think it's because a lot of times we tend to think of other people as great big, you know, universal groups. And we think, like most people in America, we think of Africans as African. Most Africans don't identify as African, almost none of them. They probably don't identify with whatever country they're in. Each country has distinct ethnic groups, and those ethnic groups are their identity. And so the idea of a Europe that is unified is absolutely silly because there's ethnic groups. There can be even ethnic groups within a country within the European Union. And each of these groups has their own history. And oftentimes the history is shared down through stories, tales whatever. It could be even modern stories like James Bond. But to to make somebody forget about their heritage or feel bad about it, you almost do have to uh, pervert their cultural heroes.
Yes, and this is where it gets where I suppose it gets more controversial because if you also take away a heritage or you say that a heritage is bad, people won't want to defend themselves. So I know in America, a lot of people cross over the Mexican border. There is um, a similar thing happening with the Mediterranean Sea at the moment. And I mean, I don't know the specifics of America, but over in the countries in Europe around the Mediterranean, they just don't seem able or willing to control the tide and the borders. They're letting them they're letting all the immigrants in, and the immigrants are, if they replace the ethnic populations, I mean, in theory, expanding the EU would be easier because these people have come from another country. They don't have ties to the land necessarily, and so it doesn't really matter which state they are operating under, because they won't have the ingrained concept of, well, this is the Spanish state, for instance, and that's the EU state. I mean, it doesn't matter to them as much because they're not Spanish, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. They share no heritage with the host people, and we have that here too. If you, I don't know if you've ever seen videos of Dr. E. Michael Jones speak on these topics. He calls it outright identity theft. You know, if the demographic change is big enough, it's identity theft. And what what happens here in America is that wherever the people come from, they just sort of uh, separate themselves into their own communities on American soil, and they vote like Americans. They have a vote like American citizens do, and but they don't vote in the interest of the American nation necessarily. They are often keen to vote for the
The donkeys,
yeah.
the donkey party.
Yeah, well, more specifically, they're keen to vote for whatever benefits their the country of their origin. So, you know, we have a depending on where you go, we have a lot of Chinese people, and they congregate. They make a Chinatown. It's all great, no problem with Chinatown. But when they vote, they want to vote for some way that helps, you know, people in China, especially if it involves immigration to America. And they're not necessarily voting for the interest of the American nation because they have no ties to the American nation. And just to kind of bring it back to the fiction piece of it, they have no stories of American nations. You know, and almost in America, we have so few. We have like George Washington could never tell a lie, and we have Paul Revere fighting against the British. Other than that, all our narrative. I'll give you a great example. President Andrew Jackson. This was a crazy dude. He fought over 100 duels. You know, in America, we used to duel for honor, where you stand back to back and you walk 10 paces apart, then you turn around and you shoot at the other person.
Yeah,
Well,
similar in Great Britain and Europe as well at the time.
oh great, I didn't know that.
Oh, there's a
So
story about the Duke of Wellington I'll tell you later.
okay, so Andrew Jackson participated in well over 100 of these duels, and he won every time. Won
Yeah.
every single time. He was shot many times, but he won every time. And he was a general. He fought in several successful battles. He was a general in one battle where he had to fight some Native American tribes. And to fight these tribes, he employed other Native American tribes, which were their cultural enemies. Andrew Jackson won. When the time came to designate land to the natives that helped him win the war, when he was president, he designated big parts of land for them. But we don't remember, in America, we really only remember Andrew Jackson as being responsible for the Trail of Tears in which many Native Americans died. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of very sad.
Yeah, I mean, something similar. They tried something similar with a hero who's much admired by English people and Britons in Great Britain, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. So you've heard of Nelson, I presume.
I don't think so.
Really? Okay.
Maybe could you give me a short version of the story? Maybe I have heard of it.
Oh, sure. Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson was during the Napoleonic Wars, was one of Britain's finest admirals and captains. He actually was the typical uh, sort of like rags to high ranks story. So he started as little better than a cabin boy, really, and then he rose up the ranks to be a vice admiral of the British fleet. And he lost an arm in battle. He got blinded in battle, so he could only see out of one eye, and he destroyed a joint French and Spanish fleet, which was going to sail to the coast of France to pick up Napoleon's men so that they could land in England. His fleet destroyed this one, and he died in the battle. The British loved him so much that they built Trafalgar Square in London, and they built Nelson's Column, and they put a statue of him on top of it. Now, at the same time as the Charlottesville stuff was happening, some progressive newspapers in the UK, I think it was either the Independent or the Guardian, said, "Oh, maybe we should get rid of Nelson's column and Nelson's statue because he was apparently pro-slavery, like most most people in Britain back then. He was pro-slavery, as and it's like that didn't succeed. Obviously, no one took it seriously. But the idea was, if we can get people to forget what he did for Britain in terms of defeating the joint Spanish and French Navy, if we can get people to forget that and just focus on the fact that he was pro-slavery, we can taint the image, we can take the memory of him, and maybe we can get rid of that statue.
And by extension, taint the British heritage, what it means to be British.
Exactly. So it seems like they did a similar thing with Andrew Jackson by just saying, well, nothing. It's just painting a one-sided story, to be fair.
Yeah, he's really only remembered for this one thing when his name is taught in school. This is what he's remembered for, and it's a shame, really, because he accomplished in many ways. He eliminated the national debt, which is huge a thing in America now. People don't realize that we eliminated the national debt because of Andrew Jackson once upon a time. And I mean, now his name is rarely mentioned in that context. I remember learning about him in schools because of the Trail of Tears. They call it Native American genocide. And in some ways, it kind of was, but he also did great things for the American nation.
And apparently other Native Americans, so it's one-sided to just say, well, he just, killed them all, basically.
Yeah, and that's another point people forget is that he allied with certain tribes. Native Americans are not one great big group, just like I said about Africans.
Oh, goodness, no.
Fighting with each other before Americans got here, and Americans allied with some against others too.
It's similar to what happened with the Cortez and the Aztecs. So Cortez had a contingent of 600 conquistadors, and he destroyed the Aztecs because the Aztecs were an empire, and they had subjugated all the other natives. And what Cortez did was he went in there and he had some translators, fortunately, and for him, and he talked to the other native tribes and he said, "I'm going to destroy the Aztec Empire. Do you want to join?" And it's like, and people when they talk about like the the creation of Mexico and the Spanish taking over, they sometimes fail to remember that the Aztecs were cutting out the hearts of, subjugated natives which they had conquered, and that the Aztecs really weren't nice people. It was just an example of two empires hitting each other, and the Spanish won because they allied with the other natives and they had gunpowder.
Yes, and to tie it back to what we were talking about before, no people, if you want to put it that way, almost no ethnic group that you could think of is innocent by modern moral standards. But they are trying to rewrite some of our history. The feminist interpretations of the Iliad are some of those. And you could even argue that by trying to make something like Star Wars or even possibly comic book heroes, by feminizing them, by making them SJW vehicles, that they're further rewriting what it means to be of a certain heritage.
Yes, they tend to. Yes, it's how do I put this? It's by diversifying the characters, what they're doing is they're saying, well, this doesn't belong to any particular race or ethnic group. So it would be like if I took, what is it called? It's the Finnish. It's like, I haven't read it, but it's like the Finnish mythology, which some say the writing of in proper form helped spark Finnish nationalist movements.
Is the prose Edda? Is that it?
Kalevala?
Oh,
Kalevala? That I haven't
okay.
read it. So the
I haven't read
Kalevala.
I haven't read that either.
Apparently Tolkien tried learning Finnish so he could read it. But anyway, this it would be like if I took that, which is obviously created by the Finnish people, and they wrote it, and I said, I've got to diversify it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an Englishman in it, I'm going to put a German in it, I'm going to put a Spaniard in it, I'm going to put a Chinaman in it, and because it needs to be, progressive, or it needs to reflect the times, is the normal term of phrase, or reflect the modern face of the Finnish nation. Everyone knows this language. So I mean,
Gotta rewrite it. Yeah.
I mean, if I did that to the Finnish mythology, what I'd be doing is I'd be trying to say, well, your mythology isn't really Finnish. It's global. It's universal. There's nothing really particularly Finnish about it. I mean, look at these people from other ethnic groups have now put into it. I think there's a sense that they're doing that with these works. They're by including people of other ethnic groups, they're kind of saying, well, no one ethnic group can claim that this is their creation or that this reflects them. It's just that this is, it's a universal property, a creative commons of something, which of course is just owned by a big, massive conglomerate which is more than happy just to create more mindless consumers.
Yes, and I have another great example of that. Yeah, so a great example of what we're talking about, diversifying cultural heroes or cultural narratives to the point of where they reduce their cultural significance. So there's a TV series of the Iliad that's on Netflix right now.
Oh dear, oh dear, I see where this is going. Continue.
I believe it started in Britain, but the point of it is that the characters, even though it's set in Greece and Troy, they look nothing like the Greeks. And to the point where that the main character of the Iliad, if you want to say that, Achilles, is played by a black guy. It, why not get somebody who looks like a Greek? And I don't even like it in when they have these films set in Greece and Rome, and everybody speaks with British accents anyway. I don't I don't understand why they're all speaking with British accents. But they don't resemble at think this is an example of diversifying a cultural narrative to the point where that it doesn't belong to any culture, and it brings no cultural identity to a certain people.
The only thing I can think of now is just the meme, and I'm going to make a derivative of it. We was Greeks. Just I'm just, I mean, that meme has so much power, but I mean, I just, it's just so absurd. It's clearly just to break down the sense of heritage,
Yeah.
that, like, European groups and especially the Greeks. I mean, although in this case, since it's made in Britain, and I'm assuming it's done with English actors or people who speak English, it's really being done to sort of get rid of the idea that this heritage really belongs to the Greeks or to the Europeans or whoever. It really is yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny as well because a load of African nations and tribes have their own mythologies, so it's not as if there's not something that can't be made with African actors and actresses.
There's plenty of great stories to be told, and for some reason, I don't know why they're not. You know, how come the Bhagavad Gita is never told? For I don't know why. I can't explain it. There's lots of Chinese stories. In fact, some of my favorite books are centuries old Chinese novels that they've translated into English. These things are great. I would not want to see a European actor in any of these in any of these Chinese books. It would just would make no sense to me at all. Oh, in fact, they did that. I'll say that they did that. They had
Really?
yes, it's an Australian show, and it's in China. They have the Legend of the Monkey King, who's a deified character. He's a monkey. He has a whole history. I won't go into it, but it's like a monkey god, and he journeys to India with a monk to retrieve some sacred scrolls, which will help them return to China and free some dead people's souls to ascend to heaven. That's the main story, main Chinese story. It's called Journey to the West for those interested.
I've heard of this. Yes, continue.
Well, there's an Australian Netflix original show. It's a take on it, so they changed the Monkey King story quite a bit, but it's full of Australian actors mixed with Asian actors. And my wife and I are watching the show, and this show is supposed to be set in China. Why are there Aussies in there?
It's just like, why is the Emperor of China played by an Australian? I'm sorry. All I'm imagining is like this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, muscle man who looks like he's just come from the beach with a surfboard under his arm, just sat on the throne of the emperor, going, "Yeah, I'm the king of China." That's all. That's all that's in my mind now. I'm sure it's not that bad, but
Well, for example, we watched it a while ago, my wife and I, but I can remember specifically when I think the first Aussie character came in, and they're sitting at a tavern, and she's like, "All right, I got what will it be? You want a beer?" And, what the hell? So,
I,
I mean, you could say it's great to learn about other people's cultural narratives. In fact, that's part of Confucianism. But to rewrite them, I think is I think there's something malicious behind it, and I think there's something that takes away that identity.
yeah, it's either motivated or it could be motivated by both of these. It's like the idea of, well, we don't really want any ethnic group to be able to claim that anything is really their own. We want to diversify to make it global. And then second, there's like the commercial interests behind it. It's just like, oh well, uh, just look at something and go, we can make money with that, I think.
Yeah, I could. Have you seen Critical Drinker's review of The Witcher?
No, actually, I have not.
It's pretty
What?
hilarious. For those who don't know, Critical Drinker, he's a Scottish guy who I guess he says he drinks a lot. He never sounds drunk in his videos, but he reviews movies and TV shows, and he goes pretty in depth on them, and they're pretty good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I quite like Critical Drinker actually. I think he's a good reviewer.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good too. And he has a review of The Witcher. Have you seen this show? It's a Netflix original.
I have watched, I'd say about 90% of the episodes. I think I have to watch three more to finish it. I'm in no rush, to be honest.
Okay. So one of the points he makes is that in a show like Game of Thrones, where they travel throughout continents and they travel across oceans and across continents, one group of people look homogenous, but the next group of people will look like they came from a different region. So a northern group of people will look wholly pale skin, and another group that is closer to the equator of the fictional world has darker skin, but they're homogenous within their group. And it's more believable that way. He says that about Game of Thrones. And he says in The Witcher, it's just all over the place. So you have, you know, country or a kingdom that has 90% white people that are pale as snow, but then the captain of the guard, he's like black as coal. And he goes, where did this guy come from? And it makes no sense that they diversify so much in The Witcher in a way that doesn't make sense, that it takes you out of the story. Whereas in Game of Thrones, you can identify, or they diversify in a way that leaves you in the story and enhances it. And so there's a way to do this. There's a way to represent represent multiple groups in a story if the story calls for it. That makes sense. And then there's a way that promotes a narrative.
Yeah, this is an excellent point because I mean, obviously, the straw man is what something akin to, well, you just want your films to contain only white people or something stupid like that, which is the straw man position. But you know, nobody complained about Game of Thrones for the diversity of the different peoples who were supposed to represent different parts of the world. I mean, in The
But it
Witcher,
made but it made sense.
it makes complete sense, and it also reflects the actual world. There's truth to it, but you know, you watch The Witcher and it's like that elf is white, that one's black, that character's brown, that character isn't. I mean, actually, funnily enough, the only people I haven't seen in there are Far East Asians. I mean, Witcher, Netflix. How could you be so, you know, racist towards Far East Asians? Here you are, you're including Indians, you're including Africans, but you won't include Far East Asians? Something's truly isn't. But Netflix needs to be cancelled and disavowed, wouldn't you agree?
I think they're saving the Asians for season 2. They really want to really want to bring them in hard for a 1-2 punch.
Something, something like that, I'm sure. They're probably going to do the same thing to Tolkien now, that they are creating a new series of that on Amazon,
So
like Tolkien's work.
they tried to create Amazon, Conan the Barbarian series to go for Amazon Prime. It fell through. My personal thought on this is that the reason why it fell through is because some Amazon studio executive didn't want to make or wanted to change Robert E. Howard's original stories to have less toxic masculinity and more diversification. Well, like I said, the people behind Robert E. Howard's estate they want Howard's characters to be represented well. So I suspect, this is just speculation on my part, that they didn't make the Amazon show because they couldn't have less toxic masculinity, more diversity, without altering Robert E. Howard's story so much. Somebody, I think, with Lord of the Rings on the new show that's going to happen, I think nobody is looking out for the Tolkien estate and keeping the stories from Tolkien's universe cohesive in a way. And I just really suspect that it's going to be hashtag woke Tolkien or something like that, you know.
When it comes out, almost certainly there's going to be backlash, but it's to be expected. We've been going on for about 2 hours and a bit now. I can't actually tell the time properly. Do you have anything to say before we end the podcast?
Well, I could just say this. There's a lot more stuff to read at Legends of Ben, and if anything I've said is offended or provoked thought within you, my thoughts go a little deeper in my writing, and that's a little clearer. So go visit the website and see what I have to say there.
Indeed, I'll have a link in the description for anyone who wants to watch. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in, and I wish you all an excellent evening and an excellent day.